in working on this project, we've kind of established this nationwide network of freeway fighting campaigns, and everyone's up against the same things.
Join your local chapter of the freeway fighting campaign.
Right? Yeah, seriously, we should set that up and make buttons and stuff. But everyone's up against the same processes, so there's a lot of capacity to share information and just best practices in terms of like how to confront some of these problems.
Welcome to the StreetsMN podcast, the show where we shape transportation and land use to make our world a better place. Coming to you from beautiful Frogtown, St. Paul, Minnesota, I'm your host, Ian R. Buck. In today's episode, we're going to be doing a deep dive on urban highway removal projects. Find the show notes and a transcript of the episode at streets.mn. There are a few highway removal projects that advocates are working on in Minnesota, but first we need a little background, so we're going to talk to Ian Lockwood of Toole Design.
I'm Ian Lockwood with Toole Design Group. We're a firm of landscape architects, engineers, and planners, urban designers. There's about 250 of us in 18 or 19 offices around North America. And all we do is livable transportation. We promote walking, cycling. We build a lot of infrastructure for active transportation, transit. We develop new places with connected networks of streets. So we really try and celebrate sort of walking, proximity, very traditional values that date back a long time, to build great places and to help society get back on a path towards sustainability and higher quality of life. We've been involved in well over 30 highway removal projects in the United States, which is pretty cool. A highway removal is different than a highway mitigation. The highway removal is when the highway is literally removed. It's no longer there anymore, and in its place is usually some sort of urban infrastructure, either a street network or a boulevard. A lot of space is created for parks, housing, schools, whatever is necessary. And there's different types of highway removals. The easiest one is called a spur removal, where a highway came into a city and then was stopped by protests or something, and it never got finished, and so it just sort of dies into the downtown or something like that. And then there's the section removal, like if a highway's coming into a city and then goes all the way through and goes out the other side, and you want to remove the part that's in the city. So it would come in, transition, become maybe an urban boulevard, and then at the end of the city, transition back to being a highway and being more high speed in the rural areas beyond the city. There's what we call this redundant section removal, which is like a section removal that I just described, except there's maybe a bypass, and so you don't have to go down the boulevard. If you still want a highway experience, you can just go around the city. And then there's relocating highways. You can just relocate it from inside the city to outside the city. And the last one, which is my favorite one, the fifth one, is the prevention. There's a lot of highway widenings and new highways on the books that date back probably to the 60s and 70s. And a lot of departments of transportation would like to build these highways. And this is one of the hardest types of highways to get rid of, to get it off the books. And that's probably the most important kind to do, because it's sort of like an emergency room doctor. You're going to stop the bleeding, do no more harm kind of thing.
Right.
The ones that are on the books have all this promise. They always say, it's going to create jobs, it's going to help people move in quickly and out quickly. And there's all these false promises that accompany these proposed highways. And so it's hard to, and they usually have traffic models to support them and say, look, the models prove it. But then they get built, and then it fills up and it becomes congested and creates more parking problems and, more pollution and, a bigger division in the community. And so the promises are never met, but the rhetoric sounds great before they're built. So you have to counter the rhetoric, which is sometimes hard. When it's actually built, you can actually point to the problem and say, hey, look, see all these problems out here? Yeah, we can get rid of all those if you would like.
I would love to see, I don't know, a governor or even somebody who's like, trying to get hired as like the commissioner of a state DOT to run on a campaign of read my lips, no new lanes.
The other thing besides removals are what we call mitigation, where where you try and keep the highway, but just make it less harmful. And that ranges from like sound walls to overpasses and underpasses, and elevating the freeway right above the whole street network so that the streets can flow underneath it, or depressing it so they can flow over top of the highway, over bridges. Or now you get even more heroic mitigation, like putting caps on little pieces of the freeway.
Right, land bridges, yeah.
Yeah, land bridges. And we have a hard enough time maintaining the bridges we have now, let alone really wide ones with parks on top of them. The mitigations, they only deal with what we call the micro problems. The things like local noise pollution, light pollution, the disconnects across the highway, walking and cycling across it. The aesthetics, it improves the aesthetics, and it actually helps land values in the vicinity of the cap, but it ignores the effects on city form, like sprawl, automobile dependency, the interchanges, and focusing so much traffic on the arterials, creating other barriers besides the highway in the community. And not to mention the energy consumption, the pollution that a car-dependent city results in. Image, ruining the transit viability by spreading out land uses so much.
Yeah.
So there's all these macro problems.
Taking away tax base from the city core and spreading it out to a bunch of suburbs, making it much harder to pay for everything. Yeah.
The pattern is that the highways export value and people to the suburbs, where people are spread out and there's so much more infrastructure out there that it costs a ton of money that's just unsustainable to support the infrastructure. When the suburbs are new, it's not a problem because it's not that expensive to maintain new infrastructure. But as they age, these suburbs don't generate enough tax base to pay for their own infrastructure replacement, and so the urban areas have to subsidize them. And so in the long run, the tax implications of the suburbs are going to be just so costly that they'll become a net sink on society.
And when I started realizing all these societal problems that highways bring, I did start thinking about well, why would we want to build highways in the first place at all? And I did have a moment where I had to step back and realize, okay, well, there is pretty much one thing that highways do really well, which is separate traffic that wants to go 60 miles an hour in big, multi-ton vehicles from traffic like me that travels on a bicycle and I'm going, 20 miles an hour tops, and transporting that traffic long distances between cities. That's really where highways shine and do their work, right? But once you put them inside cities, then they create a lot of other problems around, especially induced demand, right? Induced demand isn't something that we really have to worry too much about when a highway is going between two different destinations, two different cities, whereas within a city, it concentrates all of that traffic into one place.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of points there. We have no quarrel with highways in the right places, but they're not in the right context in cities. Between cities, not a problem. In fact, in a rural environment, you expect to go more quickly. In a suburban environment, you expect to go sort of medium speeds.
Right.
And in urban environments, you expect to go slowly. And what's happened is we've imported the rural values into cities, saying, well, wouldn't it be great to be able to go really fast in cities too? But that has a hugely divisive effect. And like you mentioned, it exports the value outside. And when you're in cities, inevitably the highways aren't being used for really highway functions. Drivers get on and a couple ramps away and just get off again. So many local trips, they've become glorified commuter routes. And a lot of the interstates in cities, no one's going huge distances in the cities. They're just going to work. And so these interstates should really be for city to city travel, not neighborhood to work type trips.
Yeah, and if we remove the highway that goes through the city, then you can build more things in a higher density model, and then the trips that you're taking are going to overall be even shorter because you'll have more things in a closer proximity to where you are, right?
Well, the reason that this whole thing about speed came up was because the original proponents of faster travel by car thought that nothing else would change. You'd just be able to get everywhere faster than you could before. But of course, it had big effects on people's habits, that had big effects on development patterns, and it created really long trips. And people exploited all of the value they could of these high speeds, and it's done tremendous damage to cities. But as you said, as we remove the highways, the cities change again, and we have models like real cities that have done this sort of thing and have reduced their vehicle miles traveled. They have reduced their average trip length. Like with slower speeds, markets change, where people live changes, affordable housing is more feasible. There's money for other things. And right now, with this sort of high-speed automobile dependency kind of thinking, we're spending tons and tons of money on just moving around long distances. It's a complete waste of money. And we can have higher qualities of life, uh, better health outcomes, preserve rural areas and habitats elsewhere. Like there's so many benefits of building, authentic cities instead of these spread out, car dependent, sprawling type cities.
Most of us who are alive today grew up in a car dependent, society, at least here in the United States, and it just seems normal. But while I've been canvassing with our streets in Minneapolis and chatting with my neighbors about, hey, here's this idea for removing, I-94. Here's what we would like to put in place of it. What do you think of this idea? And almost everybody whose doors I was knocking on, looked at the diagrams and said, well, that looks a lot better than what we've got right now. and I'm like, yeah, right on.
That's a pattern that we're noticing. The younger generations are craving these sorts of urban experiences, and they want more social interaction. They don't want to be sitting alone in the suburbs. They crave that connectedness. So I think the younger people give me a lot of hope. A lot of our highway removal work starts with a discussion about values. What's important to people? How do they picture their great grandchildren living? And they talk about this wonderful place. And we said, well, why don't we just do that now? Like, why wait?
So let's talk about place, because every city is different. It's unique. When I think about what makes St. Paul, that's very different from, we were talking about Dallas is another place where a highway removal project is happening. So when you're designing a highway removal project, like what are you looking for? What unique aspects of the community do you take into account? When it comes to like what this is going to look like?
It starts with the community values. You really want to know what's important to people. You also want to know the history, why the city was there, why the street network is like it is, what informed the way the city was shaped. And we know what shapes the highways. It's a traffic demand forecast model. But what shapes cities originally has to do with everything from the climate to the geography to the type of businesses that they had back then. Very fundamental things, kind of the roots of the city. So we want to get really grounded in the community story, historically and what they're about now. And as we change our arterials and our highways, the markets will change, and smaller format retail will happen. We'll get what we call 15 and 20-minute neighborhoods where everything's close at hand, and we'll get onto a trajectory that's far, far more sustainable than the one we're on now. And the nice thing is it will result in higher or better health outcomes. It will help with our tax base, because this highway dependency type thing and car dependency type thing is the most expensive way ever invented in the history of the world to get around. And so that will create a fiscal incentive, in terms of taxes and discretionary income and money from cities for programs like at schools, and to have swimming pools again, and all these sorts of things that cities used to provide traditionally. We can start doing that again instead of spending it all on expensive infrastructure. And this happens even down to little cities like Sulphur Springs, Texas. 16,000 people in the northeast part of Texas, in the middle of dairy country. They're not near a metro area, so they're their own place.
Mm-hmm.
Their state DOT years ago put a one-way pair right through the downtown, damaged the business environment, the core. And then they bypassed the city. I think it was in the 70s. All the business moved from the core to the bypass.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only like 10 years ago where they redid their main street, they redid their square, they restored two-way operations in the city, and investment came back. Local entrepreneurs could open up shops. The historic buildings were fixed up. The boards were taken off the windows, and this little city has gone through a renaissance, and it's all because of traditional values, community values being expressed in the transportation realm.
And that didn't even require the bypass to be taken out, right? Like that
Right.
highway still exists.
Yeah, you can still have your suburban experience and your national chain restaurants and so forth, but this authentic urbanism in the downtown, even in a little place like Sulphur Springs, you can't compete against that. It's got so much quality to it. It feels so authentic to people, and so that hasn't been lost on employers. There's employers moving there now. It's affordable to live there, and so these principles apply in little rural America places, and rural America is suffering now, and so it's not just the big cities that can benefit by this kind of stuff. It's every place, every urban environment, even little towns and hamlets can benefit by the same kind of thinking.
I would love to be able to say, no, we don't need to get all your urbanism while we're out here on vacation. We've got good urbanism at home.
That's right. Yeah, we have to go to Disney where you can walk down fake streets and look at fake buildings up to the street and all that social and economic exchange that's going on the streets. But why can't we have really vibrant places in our cities that we can go to and do the same thing?
All right, that was a lovely bit of background information on highway removal projects. Now we're ready to talk to some local advocates about the projects that they're working on. Thanks for joining us, Ian.
All right, bye for now.
All right, so now we are going to talk to a couple of staff members at Our Streets Minneapolis. Our Streets Minneapolis is a transportation advocacy organization here in the Twin Cities, grew out of the old Minneapolis Bicycle Coalition. And we've got Alex Burns, who is the Transportation Policy Coordinator, and Jose Antonio Sayas Caban, the Advocacy Director at Our Streets. So welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks. Yeah, we're happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
So we've got two local highway removal proposals that Our Streets is pushing for. The Twin Cities Boulevard and Bring Back 6th. So let's talk, details about those. Like, what are the project bounds of those two proposals?
The Twin Cities Boulevard is a vision for a project that the Minnesota Department of Transportation is undertaking right now called Rethinking I-94. And the reason that this project is happening is because the infrastructure, the pavement, the retaining walls, the bridges, etc., on I-94 are nearing the end of their useful life, and the DOT needs to decide what comes next, whether that's a reconstructed or expanded freeway or something else. And specifically, this corridor has been narrowed to the area between Hiawatha in Minneapolis and Marion Street in St. Paul. So what we tell folks is it's about the area, the 7.5 miles in between downtown Minneapolis and downtown St. Paul. And what the Twin Cities Boulevard is a vision to bring reparative justice to that corridor by recognizing not only the initial harm, but the ongoing harm that the highway has caused, and to repair that through a few things, which we can talk about in more detail, but by filling in the freeway trench, adding a surface level urban boulevard that includes multimodal transportation options, a reconnected street grid to stitch neighborhoods back together, and then reparative investment in housing and business opportunities in that reclaimed freeway land and adjacent parcels of publicly owned land to bring like more walkable, locally owned businesses, more housing that's affordable to the communities along the corridor, and bringing the amenities that used to exist before the highway tore them out in the 60s.
I'm glad that you use the word like stitched back together the community, because the highway trench really does feel like a physical scar in, the landscape of our city.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's something you can clearly see it in an aerial or a Google map, but I think the best way to experience the barrier, like it's a physical and a mental barrier. And just walking across the highway on like a pedestrian bridge or on one of the street bridges, it is a extremely unpleasant experience. And for many people, like what we remind folks and how it ties back to some of our other campaigns like winter sidewalk shoveling is it's inaccessible for a lot of people if you go there during the winter. These are some of the worst maintained places. Many of these bridges are not ADA accessible. They can be like hundreds of yards apart,
Mm-hmm.
the crossings. So it truly is, a trench and a divide for the communities through which it runs.
Yeah, living in Frogtown, I've had to like develop very specific routes for getting north-south, in my neighborhood, because like the ideal places to like cross the highway don't always line up with like the ideal places to cross University Avenue, and like I'm zigzagging around, and it's huge barrier to accessing anything else that's south of me.
I think that something that has also occurred to us, and just in terms of how to describe it, is that when we bring these ideas to the community and we're describing, what you're talking about, a scar or a barrier, it has helped folks understand that it is also economic barrier. A lot of the things that you're doing, if you multiply them times being an economically marginalized person, wherever you are on that spectrum, it also creates a lot of problems, right? And so, whether we're talking about health issues or access to employment or getting to those amenities, it is about an economy that used to exist there that mostly benefited the community, that should be restored and also reimagined in a way that, when we're talking about reparative justice, is not just bringing things back to normal, but also bringing them up to a point where it's actually having a positive impact on communities that were marginalized then that existed within those neighborhoods, but also the communities that were negatively impacted. We take these barriers and we put them at the end of a spectrum where the endpoint is a positive vision, and we give folks an opportunity to engage with something with the full understanding of how it works and how it's impacted them, but also that if they take these steps and they become engaged and they take action, it might give them an opportunity to see something in their neighborhoods that really hasn't happened in decades.
Yeah, and I've heard you guys talk before about like the intentionality of creating the renderings of like what the Twin Cities Boulevard could look like, and how that is intended not as like a final design or anything, but like as a catalyst for allowing people in the community to look at this thing and like see, oh yeah, this could be so much better. This place could be a desirable place to spend time rather than just, a highway to get through. And I gotta say, like I myself didn't really think of removing 94 as something that was like politically feasible until I saw the renderings, and then I was captured. I was like, ooh, I want to work my butt off to like get this to happen. So it certainly worked on me.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, one other thing that kind of comes to mind there as well is that sometimes a question comes up of how these ideas emerge. And especially from folks who sometimes try to push back against the idea that some individual community member that is like in a serious situation that's being impacted by this freeway somehow should have the responsibility to work out the transportation expertise, to imagine a transportation solution for their entire neighborhood, and then get their whole neighborhood together, all of them who are struggling because of this freeway, and put this proposal forward. And, so if you kind of keep following that logic as saying, well, things are bad for you, so why don't you pick yourself up and figure out how to make it better, and also create the social movement to solve this problem for yourself. And what we're saying is look, like everything needs to be shaped through community consent and community engagement, but we have a certain expertise in transportation, and we have the ability and the resources to build partnerships and do research and gather information to at least create the framework, just like you're describing, so that when we go talk to you at the door, we make it easy for you to become engaged with this and help shape it, obviously, and then give you a total sense of ownership, because our goal is to basically give it over to the community and for the community to take it over and take it to the finish line. But we have this privilege and power as a transportation organization that we should be using and putting to good use, so that the starting point isn't zero, and so that we're handing something over where they can stand on our shoulders and they can see us and feel us as a shield for decision makers, and see us sort of standing up for them and looking out for them. And all we got to do is say, like, we don't want anything in return. We want you to benefit, but to the degree that we know, it can be this good. And so, like Alex always says, expanding community imagination. Our mission is to make sure that imagination is expanded to the limit, to the degree that it's plausible, by using our expertise to frame all of that. And so, I think that's a great point, and I think we think about that a lot. It's like we have no stakeholders other than the people that we door knock. You know what I mean? But we want to make sure that our expertise is put to good use, and the best way to put it forward is through positive visioning that people can just stand on, and do just a few little things to make sure that it works really well.
All right, so that was the Twin Cities Boulevard project. Let's talk also about the Bring Back 6th project. This regards the Olson Memorial Highway up in North Minneapolis, which is a neighborhood that I'm not nearly as familiar with. So can you talk about that a little?
So the interesting thing about Bring Back 6, it starts with Harrison Neighborhood Association, the Blue Line Coalition, putting an effort to repair a lot of the harms that have happened on the north side in that area, and the expectation that the Blue Line extension was going to go through Olson Memorial Highway, and with it, safety improvements and housing and commercial development was going to come with it. It didn't happen, and the safety improvements never came. But the announcement of the extension alone led to displacement and gentrification. To the best of my understanding, hundreds of families, a lot of them immigrant families. And as you might know or might not know, that part of North Minneapolis has always been actually sort of a place for a lot of different immigrant groups to stop in and make it their home. And so it really just started with a conversation about what safety improvements were possible. And we sat together with Harrison Neighborhood Association and figured out that a lot was possible. And that led for us to launch a campaign with shared expertise, because HNA has so much experience with housing and some with land use, that we were able to roll out vision for a restored 6th Avenue North, where we could explain how safety improvements could be brought in through a first phase in such a way that allowed for a second phase to emerge with a reconstruction of Olson Memorial Highway to 6th Avenue North, that then facilitated returning this land for community benefit. Historically, it's interesting. One of the things that we learned through the partnership is that this community was the subject of displacement and disinvestment and destruction about 20 years before the Rondo neighborhood. And it's just sort of like been a little bit erased.
I've heard a little about a pop-up museum that you guys have that you've brought to some like festivals and community get-togethers, and it has a lot of like stations to learn about the history of 6th and what we could be bringing back, which sounds like a really cool and unique way of advocating for a project like this.
We initially asked for a closure for an open streets.
That would be dope.
Yeah. And so, but I think that the best part about it is like doing advocacy in such a way where people can come to an event and engage with an idea that is bookended by what used to be there.
Mm-hmm.
clear understanding of the intentional racist destruction of that neighborhood, that we didn't just get interstates and highways, they were intentionally placed on top of Black Americans all over the country, and the same was here in Minnesota. And then for them to be able to have that emotional experience and then sort of come back to the campaign that we've been having and imagine sort of like what things could look like in the future, through a block party, through music, and through food, and come out thinking this is possible for us. It's been a great process, and I think something we're going to continue doing, and hopefully along the I-94 corridor as well.
I hear that museum's going to be making an appearance at other Open Streets events, right?
Definitely. Yeah. We hope to have it at every Open Streets, right?
Yep, that's cool.
And yeah, so definitely, another reason to come check out Open Streets. I mean, something that people within the community like definitely know, but I think the way that we tell this story, it's as if the book of the highway's harms has been closed. And it's just like something we look back on and it's like, what a shame, But obviously the history like is directly tied to like the outcomes and like the reality that we're in today. And collectively, as a community, we have an opportunity both on I-94 and on Olson Memorial Highway to reckon with that history and decide if that infrastructure and those outcomes are acceptable to us or if we need to take a different approach.
If we're just like constantly lamenting, the terrible history that we have and not taking steps to repair that harm, like, then what the hell are we doing here?
Anyone can talk about what's wrong and anyone can learn to understand it. And that's an important part, awareness, education, re-information, if you're engaging with things that have been whitewashed. But the real question is, what are you willing to do about it? And we feel like as an organization, we can create really strong incentives through what we know and what we understand for folks to feel like they can do something about it. And our job is to kind of start that.
So you mentioned like bringing that energy into the community. Let's talk about like what the strategies are here that we're using. I know that we're door knocking in the neighborhoods that are adjacent to like I-94. I've participated in a few door knocking sessions. It seems like we're in kind of phase one right now of like making sure that people are aware of this opportunity to reshape our community into something better. Like, what comes next? What are we up to?
If the community like comes together and stands up for something, like we absolutely believe it will happen. And that's what we're prepared to do. And we're not going to stop until that does. But I think in terms of some near-term timelines as that movement proceeds, with Rethinking I-94, it's a bit different because there is this established project that's working its way through the federal and state environmental impact statement process, the EIS process. So one exciting update that some listeners of the podcast may have heard, but we did get a letter from the interim MnDOT commissioner saying that a highway to boulevard conversion will be considered in the upcoming project options for Rethinking I-94. So it's really important that not only it's the Twin Cities Boulevard that they're considering, but also that the evaluation criteria, so basically like the things that they use to evaluate the different options, are prioritizing community health, are prioritizing economic opportunity, are prioritizing reduced climate emissions, prioritizing better transportation options for people who can't afford a car, etc. If those options are prioritized, then highway to boulevard conversion will clearly stand out. Mm-hmm. If they are prioritizing average traffic speed that they're forecasting in 2055, then that's just not going to happen. So, to put it simply, put the needs of highway adjacent communities first. And that's what we're focused on in the near term with this project.
I've heard that the Federal Highway Administration has been like, there's movement at that level to give money to state DOTs who want to do like urban highway removal projects. Is that right? Have we heard anything on that front?
Yeah, that's a perfect transition actually, because that was the other near-term thing. As part of the bipartisan infrastructure agreement, there was $1 billion set aside for a program specifically to fund both the planning and the construction of highway removal projects called the Reconnecting Communities Pilot Program. This is such a critical opportunity for Minneapolis and St. Paul to submit a joint application when the program opens this June to apply for $2 million that could bring in experts that aren't fully ingrained in the highway industrial complex, that aren't just going to assume that the freeway is going to be rebuilt, that are actually going to take a holistic approach at analyzing what could a highway to boulevard conversion and reparative justice on this corridor look like, and then arm that city and and community members with that information as this project proceeds. So we feel that is a critical step, that the cities both take that action. And if people go to twincitiesboulevard.org right now and click on the Get Involved section, they can send an email to Minneapolis and St. Paul decision makers asking them to, among other things, support that action. We describe these campaigns as living and breathing. So this is a high level vision for a better future without the highway, but this is always going to be driven by community feedback and community consent. So one of the tools that we have to do that is by asking people at the doors about specific parts of that vision, kind of like walking them through and then aggregating that data. So I think for the Twin Cities Boulevard, we're at about 500 people that have filled out that survey, and still need to do a full deep dive. And we plan on presenting the first wave of that information at a community forum that we'll host in late June, correct? We'll get the exact date on that. But some of the themes that have emerged for me, I think of a few things. First, I think people are well aware of how the highway impacts them. And there was a lot of people that spoke about, because we're door knocking in the communities really close to the highway, they talk about the noise. They talk about a long legacy of health impacts like asthma and cancer, the other resulting impacts from like the toxic air pollution that comes from the highway corridor. Also, I think like in general, people have been super excited about just the idea that like the highway doesn't have to exist. And a few things in particular that we've seen broad community support for. First, having those amenities back within their neighborhood. A lot of people talked about how the specific communities along the highway are like pretty far away from walkable grocery stores, walkable pharmacies, childcare, just like your daily needs that some neighborhoods have an abundance of, but places along the highway, it's just like, a lot of people have to drive or if they don't have a car, find another way to get to these basic needs, like at a suburban box store or something. Those are things that used to exist right in the community, and people were super excited about seeing those things come back. The other thing I think that seemed to really resonate was having access to rapid transit service, and a bikeway connecting the two cities. In particular, there seems to be broad consent for zero fare transit. So having this transit corridor in the heart of our region connecting the two major cities be zero fare, so that it would be fully dedicated lane. You would not have to pay to get on. And that is truly like the gold standard, in our opinion, of making transportation access affordable and accessible for everyone. Quite a few people specifically called out the zero fare aspect as something that they were excited about.
The other thing I would add is the folks who talk about housing, especially when we meet folks who have been displaced by the freeway. So every so often there will be an anecdote about where they used to live before I-94 was there, what's happened to them. And that's again an important thing to remember. It wasn't that long ago that there are still people who are living those harms from day one.
All right. If audience members want to help out with these projects, where can they go? What can they do?
Yeah, go to the website, look through both of the projects, and definitely take the action steps. It takes no time to fill out a survey. and send out an email to decision makers and to anyone that hasn't been following our work. Decision makers and elected officials really love getting the tens of thousands of emails that they are sent. So they'll be excited to get a few more.
And the form makes it super easy. Like I clicked on the link and it just like auto-filled like, here's a suggested email. You can edit it as much as you want to or as little, and like it sends it off to the right people who represent you. Awesome. Alex, Jose Antonio, thanks for joining us. And I'll see you guys around.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Ian. Appreciate it.
And highway removal projects aren't just limited to the Twin Cities area. We've also got some cool projects taking shape in places like Duluth. So I got together with Jordan Vanderhagen to talk about the Highway 61 revisited concept in downtown Duluth.
My name is Jordan Vanderhagen. I founded a group in Duluth called the Duluth Waterfront Collective a few years ago. And since then, I've actually moved to Minneapolis, but I'm still keeping involved. But I also am working as a landscape designer and urban designer for Damon Farber. The backstory is that when I was interning in Duluth for a summer job, it was the year before my graduate thesis. And so I decided to take on the Lake Avenue overpass in Duluth for the purpose of kind of like identifying that as like the must be fixed connection between the waterfront and downtown areas. And that's what I did my thesis on, and that was at North Dakota State in Fargo. So I completed that and then moved back to Duluth afterwards and got a full-time job there. And during that time, I just started to meet people in the community who kind of felt the same way, you know, like a lot of people in Duluth are kind of, you know, aware of the fact that 35 creates this sort of disconnect. And so as I was getting to know people, I found a lot of people had similar ideas. So we kind of started having these like monthly design charrettes, and that's how the group kind of came to be. And it slowly kind of expanded outwards from there in terms of both like who was involved, but also just like the area we were looking at grew to be more than just the bridge and kind of the whole downtown stretch.
That sounds like some fun parties.
Yeah, well, yeah, it was cool, and I mean, it was an interesting way to get to know people, just because there were, you know, so many different folks who had different, like, I mean, people saw different things in it. There were different reasons for people to want to help out, whether it was, you know, people who were, you know, big bikers, or people who were into like stormwater remediation, things like that, or people who were into like the economic development side of things. As we kept going, I mean, it really started to bring together a pretty, you know, diverse crowd of folks who came together around the idea.
Yeah, that's what I've noticed about a lot of these freeway removal campaigns is like there's a little bit in there for everybody.
Yeah,
right?
For sure. Or at least there should be. I mean, if they're done well, I think that there's plenty of space to find things that, you know, everyone can take something from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my interactions with the area mostly are as a cyclist, you know, and like coming up into Duluth via like the Willard Munger Trail.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And then of course the trail ends, you know, and you're in town, and you know the optimal route to get like into downtown Duluth involves like you're on a street for a little while, and then you get onto a trail, and then you get onto like a pedestrian bridge that has this crazy T-junction like above the freeway.
Yeah. That's another thing that a lot of people have been like, people call it, have heard it referred to as it, like it feels like you're going to a prison or something like that, just because it's this concrete platform with fences, and then you're right, you have to make like a sharp left into the downtown area. So that's something that we're also looking at in part of our scope. But
yeah, because there's a trail that starts like underneath the freeway.
Yeah, well, technically that's the Cross City Trail is what it's called, and so their ultimate goal is to connect up to the Munger Trail in West Duluth. But there, like you said, there are still some gaps that they're trying to figure out.
Yeah. Although I was impressed like last summer when they were doing construction on one of the streets that usually is the connection,
Mhm.
and they had like a really good bike detour
Yeah.
of like temporary two-way bike lanes
Yeah.
on another parallel street.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's probably the best streetscape in Duluth right now is it's Superior Street, but
Mhm.
it's going through Lincoln Park. And yeah, I mean, it's just a really good example, and it's nice to see, you know, an example of that in Duluth, because right now there aren't a lot of places that have that sort of treatment.
Right.
Even if it's temporary, I hope they end up keeping it. But originally, before the freeway construction that they're doing, that trail went like right along the freeway.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's honestly better to have it run next to all the businesses that people are trying to get to.
Absolutely. Yeah. That street seemed like, you know, a fair, like a nice walkable, you know, lots of businesses that are like right there on the sidewalk front.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really kind of made it feel very vibrant in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
And then, I mean, the tourist area that people always think about when it comes to Duluth is the lakefront, you
Mhm.
know, where
Yeah, Canal Park.
Grandma's Cafe, et cetera,
Yeah.
et cetera. Which is, I mean, that's like one of the major points of the freeway removal
Mhm.
proposal, right? Is that like the freeway just cuts off all of Canal Park from the rest of the city.
Right. Yeah, it's really kind of divided, and it's almost like, you know, that thing where you have the Galapagos Islands, and there are the birds that are on different islands, and they kind of specialize into these unique forms because they're geographically separated. Obviously, it's not quite like that, but similarly, yeah, Canal Park has really just become this tourist-only place that's really developed to cater to those folks, whereas downtown is kind of like residents only, and really there should be more of an intermingling of the two, just to make sure residents can access the amenities of the waterfront, but also so that, you know, some of that tourist activity can help revive some of the businesses that are downtown too.
Yeah. And even like in its current iteration, it feels like Canal Park doesn't really serve like tourists super well either, because like the freeway there dictates that like anybody who wants to go and walk around in Canal Park, they're going to be driving their car into Canal Park, finding
Right.
somewhere to park, and then walking around, right?
Yeah.
Because you're not going to walk across the freeway from anywhere else in town to get there.
Right.
And so it's like it's this terrible mixture of like frustrated drivers who are just like trying to find a good, you know, a place to park that's cheap, and you know, like
Right.
and then there's a bunch of people who are walking around and getting in the way and like
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that we've kind of tried to focus on, is trying to eliminate, you know, congestion in Canal Park. Because of the freeway, like you're saying, you know, you've got like one key entry point to the whole neighborhood.
So the name of your website, right, is highway61duluth.com.
That's right.
Which, you know, is alluding to the fact that, like, you know, US Highway 61 existed long before the interstates, right?
Right.
And that went through downtown Duluth. And so you're trying to kind of bring us back to something more akin to what you would see with a U.S. highway that becomes like the main street of whatever town it's going through.
Yeah, exactly. You hit the nail on the head. It's taking it from, you know, this sort of freeway that ignores the context of what it's going through, and just kind of, you know, maintains this controlled access at all costs. And thinking of, you know, what would a highway, like, what would be the best version of that in an urban area? How could we make that more integrated into the environment and, you know, allow it to still serve its purpose? It's still kind of a really important spine for, you know, freight movement and people who are traveling through Duluth, because there isn't really another way around the city that's convenient. So it's
There's
gonna
kind of a lake in the way.
Well, that's part of it too. Yeah, it's geographically very, difficult to build in Duluth. So
Oh, and then hills on the other side. Yeah.
right. Yeah, so it's tough, but you're definitely, you know, it's a role that's still going to need to be served in some way. But we think that, you know, through traffic probably isn't as much of the traffic as people might think once you actually start looking at, who's local, who's moving from like just nearby neighborhoods. And then also if we can get like the Northern Lights Express and other like solid transit options and improving the biking and walking systems, that's going to be that many more people who are no longer driving through this area as well. And even today, I mean, it's not a lot of traffic compared to most freeways. I think there's like a traffic count of 32,000 daily trips, which is not a lot, especially for a freeway. And there are even some local streets in Duluth that are pretty close to that number.
Yeah, wait, 32,000 a day. I feel like we have county roads here in like the Twin Cities that handle more traffic than that.
Yeah, you do. I've looked into it. Yeah, for sure. I think I-94 for reference is what, like 150,000 or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's a different ball game for sure, but
and that actually, I mean, that does make me think about the fact that, here in the Twin Cities for like the Rethinking I-94, Twin Cities Boulevard project, right? That is a proposal to like get rid of a section of freeway that is a through connection, right? It goes straight through the Twin Cities. Whereas like Highway 35 in Duluth, like that's where the freeway ends.
Yeah.
That's
another thing that's probably a pretty defining difference between the two. You're right. I mean, it goes a mile beyond the area we're looking at. And if it weren't for the fact that it actually is pretty reasonable for that last mile where it's going through tunnels and caps, we'd probably be advocating for that to be removed as well. I think there's opportunities to take a similar treatment beyond this area, like where it comes out of the Rose Garden Tunnel. It goes through the Indian neighborhood, which is where I used to live, and does the similar sort of thing that it does in downtown where there aren't, good options for getting across it, and it's like right on the lakefront at that point too. So I think you could take a similar approach there, and maybe even have the traffic go onto London Road a little bit sooner, and then just like convert all of that right of way to just purely park space. But
especially right on the lakefront. Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, it people say, we won't be able to get along without the freeway, but it turns into a 2-lane road just a couple miles past this area. And, I don't think anyone's going to act like that's perfect, because anyone who lives on London Road will tell you, having to wait hours just to get out of your driveway isn't fun. But it shows that, that even that size of roadway is capable of handling the through traffic that we get.
So on the website, we've got this kind of rendering of what at least one spot in the Highway 61 revisited vision could be, and
it's a living concept. You're hearing me talking about this is like we've got new things, and not everything on the website shows a consistent vision of what this is because of that, because it is an all volunteer effort. So it's kind of like, as I have time to, go and update stuff, I'll do that. But, I think that was the thing we were very clear about right from the beginning. Is like, this hasn't been vetted by the community yet. So we're putting this out, when we first released it online, we were just like, we're putting this out with the intention of getting feedback, and I think just that process of hearing from people has made it so much stronger.
And you've had some positive responses from local politicians, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, we've got support from a number of people at the like local legislature level, and in the city administration and city council. There's been a lot of support, and so I mean, I think everyone's kind of on board with the idea of we can do better than like what we have right now. I don't know if everyone's necessarily on board with the vision. I think politically people are excited about it, but as far as the community goes, there are a lot of folks who are still skeptical of the idea of how this would work.
Right.
Or the people who, use the freeway to commute across town every day. There's a lot of skepticism amongst those people. So I think, what we've really advocated for isn't like, build this. This is perfect as it is, do it. It's more so like, look at what's possible.
Mm-hmm.
Like, think about all these things we could do. Don't you think we should be studying that? And that's what we've been pushing on MnDOT to consider.
So what's next? What do we got coming up for the Duluth Waterfront Collective?
Yeah, so this summer, MnDOT is undertaking a I-35 corridor study.
Mm-hmm.
And thanks to all of the people who have, kind of rallied around this idea, we were able to advocate for kind of like a high-level assessment of this idea to be included in that. So we're looking forward to seeing what comes of that. I don't think it's going to be like the let's do it or let's not answer, but I think it will help better understand, how this process can work out. Because again, they're looking at the entire corridor from the top of the hill to where it ends on London Road and trying to figure out, what do we have to spend to keep this in shape? What projects are coming up? What are the concerns in the community? And so I think, really what we're trying to focus on now is less so, this sort of community design approach that we've been doing the past few years, and more so just, advocacy around making sure people know when to show up to those events and when to make their voices heard.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to be a long process to get this to where we want it to go. But if we can keep people aware of the processes, I think, that'll be a really important factor in how we keep this moving forward.
One of the aspects of these designs that really excites me is the idea of putting more housing developments in the space where the freeway used to be.
I mean, yeah, if you look at the employment density of Duluth, like the downtown area, it has the city, county offices, Essentia Health. Like a lot of the biggest employers are all downtown.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nowhere to live downtown. Like when I moved to Duluth, I wanted to live downtown because that's where I worked, but it was impossible to find anything. And, you think about how many people who are currently commuting from, Lakeside or West Duluth or Hermantown who might want to be living closer to their jobs. If all of this housing came available and they suddenly moved and had opportunities to move, closer, that's that many less vehicles that are on the highway now. And people who are walking and suddenly are able to have, healthier options for how they get around the city. I think, it just is one of those things that kind of, multiplies on itself when you start to implement it, where you're bringing in all these efficiencies that a freeway just doesn't provide. Like this can help alleviate some of the demand we see in Duluth if we're suddenly opening up this 40 acres. If we don't do that, that demand pressure is going to find other places to be built. And it might be straight up replacing people's homes, which I think would be, a far worse outcome than displacing, a freeway or a few lanes of concrete,
Displacing freeways makes me think of a potential slogan here, right? Because we like to say housing for people, not for cars, right?
Yeah.
Displacement for freeways, not for people.
Yeah, totally.
Like that.
Yeah, I should make another graphic that has something like that going on. I love that. I think the final thing I would say is if you look at a city like Duluth and you say, what are the top problems that the city is up against? And not everyone's going to agree on what that is. It might be we need to increase wages for people, or we need to make our city resilient to climate change, and we need to handle stormwater, or we need to make sure that there are people who are currently experiencing homelessness who can have homes. No one's gonna say we're in a crisis of commute times here in Duluth.
Yeah.
So why are we devoting so much land in our city that could be productive for all of those other concerns in terms of solving them to something that's not even a problem?
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you think about it that way, no matter where you are, here in St. Paul or in Minneapolis or in Duluth or wherever, I think that's really how we have to start thinking about how we use land in our cities, is how can it best solve the, pressing crises of our times. And, giving people a place to sit and idle in traffic is not helping anybody.
Right. Yeah.
That's my closing thought, I guess.
There we go. Thanks for joining us, Jordan.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Streets MN podcast. This show is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Non-Derivative license, so feel free to republish the episode as long as you are not altering it and you are not profiting from it. The music in this episode is by Eric Brandt and the Urban Hillbilly Quartet. This episode was hosted and edited by me, Ian R. Buck, with transcript by the indomitable Mike Allen. Christy Marsden is our awesome guest booker, and technical assistance is provided by the super professional Brian Mitchell. If you're able to help make sure this team gets paid for the hard work that they do, please consider donating at streets.mn/donate. We really appreciate it. If you have feedback or ideas for future episodes, drop us a line at podcast@streets.mn. In particular, we're currently working on an episode about the EV car share service, so if you're an EV user, we'd love to hear your experiences with it. How does it integrate with your life? What has been your favorite experience? Any frustrations? Record a quick voice memo and send it in to podcast@streets.mn. Until next time, take care.